St. Cloud, 10 November 1799. The sky hangs gray and heavy, the air charged with tension. The Seine Valley, west of Paris, lies under tight military control. Grenadiers at the gates, dragoons along the avenues, artillery ready to seal every approach. For security, the two councils have been moved here, a security that smells of strategy. Bonaparte wears no crown, yet holds real power, the power of bridges and roads. From the Carousel to Neuilly and Sèvres, the capital is a guarded island, cut off from the world. In the Council of 500, his brother Lucien presides. In the Council of Ancients sit men determined to end the Directory. Within a few miles between Paris and St. Cloud, the fate of France is decided. The 18th and 19th of Brumaire, 9 and 10 November, are not just dates. They are coordinates for a surgical operation to overthrow a regime exhausted by war, debt, and hunger. In a few hours, debates will become shouts, and a sudden gesture will change history without a single musket shot. But how did a young Corsican officer, raised among maps and guns, get this far? And above all, what will happen when the doors of the Orangery close behind him? Napoleon Bonaparte was born at Ajaccio in 1769, when Corsica, recently transferred from Genoa to France, was still a shifting frontier land. Among mountains that cut the island north to south and harbors exposed to the Mistral, a boy of modest family quickly learns that geography can decide destinies. At 10, he crosses the Ligurian Sea and the interior of France. Brienne, in Champagne, becomes his first real training ground. There, he studies trigonometry, cartography, military history. He does not shine for elegance, but for precision and calculation. Artillery, the science of angles and distances, becomes his mother tongue. In 1784, he reaches the École Militaire in Paris, entering the artillery arm, the branch that measures each shot in seconds and degrees, that weighs terrain before courage. A year later, he is a second lieutenant. He passes from Auxonne to Valence and La Fère, sketching forts, setting elevation, measuring range, observing how a river can arrest an army or an alpine pass open a campaign. The Revolution of 1789 throws open careers the ancient regime kept shut. He returns repeatedly to Corsica, an island split between French loyalties and independentist nostalgia. Here rules Pascal Paoli, the hero of the resistance against Genoa who now, after years of exile in England, governs from 1794 with British support. Between them, the relationship quickly sours. Paoli distrusts the young officer, too close to revolutionary France. Their paths diverge. Bonaparte chooses Paris, the army, and above all, he chooses France.
Did you know that most people who watch our documentaries aren't subscribed yet? If you enjoy animated maps and history, join our community. Leave a like and subscribe so you never miss the next episodes.
Toulon, winter 1793. The British fleet uses the great Mediterranean harbor as a strategic outpost. The city, shielded by coastal batteries and heights overlooking the roadstead, seems unassailable. Bonaparte studies the curve of hills and the arc of fire, concentrates artillery on the Little Gibraltar, Fort Mulgrave, and on Les Goulettes, breaking the defense that seals the harbor entrance. With those heights in French hands, the guns dominate the port. The enemy fleet is forced to evacuate. For the first time, his name binds itself to a change on the map. The West Mediterranean loses a naval battle hostile to France. The reward is promotion to brigadier general at just 24. The next year, amid Thermidore's political turmoil, he is arrested, accused of being too close to the fallen Jacobins. The charge collapses within weeks, and he returns to command. In 1795, in Paris, comes the decisive test. On 13 Vendémiaire, 5th October, a royalist rising marches against the government. Bonaparte arrays battles between Saint-Roch, the Rue Saint-Honore, and the Tuileries, sitting guns to cross fire on the approaches. A blast of grape shot scatters the attackers in minutes. It is more than a military victory. The map of the capital changes. The key points pass under army control. The Directory, saved, gives him command of the Army of the Interior. The following year, he receives command of the Army of Italy. The direction is now set. His way of fighting is born from reading the ground and turning maps into decisions. Toulon and Vendémiaire fixed the method: observe, concentrate fire, dominate the nodal points. From now on, he will follow lines linking ports, passes, and capitals. In 1796, he receives command of the Army of Italy, deployed between Liguria and the Alps. With a string of rapid victories, he defeats the Austrians and the Piedmontese, seizes Milan, and compels Mantua to surrender. With the Treaty of Campo Formio in October 1797, France's frontier reaches the Rhine, and the Cisalpine Republic is born. In 1798, he sails for Egypt. He wins at the Pyramids, but the fleet is destroyed at the naval battle of Aboukir, and the campaign stalls after the failed siege of Acre. Cut off from the Mediterranean, in the summer of 1799, he returns to France and heads for Paris. While France's frontiers shift ceaselessly with the wars, politics grinds to a halt. The Directory, founded to block monarchy's return and curb revolutionary excess, is now paralyzed by debts, military crises, and internal rivalries. In 1799, the Second Coalition retakes parts of Italy and Switzerland. In Paris, bread prices rise and inflation fuels popular anger. Emmanuel Sieyès, a director and man of ideas, is convinced a sword is needed, a general able to impose a new constitution. Talleyrand supplies political contracts, while Lucien Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother and president of the Council of 500, guarantees control of the assembly. The brothers are strongly bound, yet different in character. Lucien is more idealistic and less drawn to personal power, but in those decisive days, his loyalty is total. He will steer the chamber, and at the peak of tension, defend his brother with words and gestures that entered history. The plan, simple yet decisive, calls for moving the deputies away from Paris, where a crowd could sway decisions, and gathering them at St. Cloud outside the city. It is 18 Brumaire in the revolutionary calendar, 9 November 1799. That morning, the Council of Ancients approves the transfer and gives Napoleon command of the troops in Île-de-France. Units move at once, seizing the nodal points: the Tuileries, the Carousel, the bridges of the Seine, and the main approaches to the capital. Within hours, Paris is under military control. Meanwhile, envoys and allies work to secure parliamentary support for the new political arrangement. Patrols secure the arsenals, the printing presses, and the post, choking off messages and rumors. When, in the afternoon, the two councils reach St. Cloud, the stage for the coup is already set. The city is isolated, military power in Bonaparte's hands, and every possibility of defending the Directory has evaporated. Police detachments neutralize messengers, couriers, and would-be agitators. Any attempt to rally the sections is smothered at birth. Over the course of the day, the Directory falls apart. Barras, aware the coup is now unstoppable, tenders his resignation. Sieyès and Ducos, already aligned with Napoleon, formally withdraw from the executive. Only Gohier and Moulins remain opposed, and they are neutralized. Watched, constrained in their movements, they cannot coordinate any response. As evening falls, the capital is quiet. Streets and bridges are held by the army. No crowds gather, and the two consuls, already transferred to St. Cloud, are far from Paris and cut off from the dissolved government. The next day, 19 Brumaire, the decisive moment arrives. In the palace rooms and the Orangerie at St. Cloud, political debate turns to open confrontation. Bonaparte addresses the Council of Ancients, urging that the government be remade, then enters the 500, the Stormier Chamber. There he is met by shouts and accusations of a coup. The crisis explodes. Lucien, presiding, declares that armed deputies threaten the freedom of deliberation and transfers authority to the military. Operational command passes to General Murat. Grenadiers and the Legislative Guard enter the Orangerie, remove hostile deputies, and restore order. The Directory ceases to exist, not through battle, but by physically occupying the key points: doors, courtyards, approaches. Within hours, a provisional government, Bonaparte, Sieyès, and Ducos, takes shape. The council, reduced to a commission, authorizes the drafting of a new constitution. Under the protection of troops controlling bridges and roads, the Constitution of Year 8 emerges. 3 consuls in power, a strong executive, and separate legislative bodies. Paris stays calm. The provinces fall in line. France changes regime by moving thousands of men within 10 miles of the capital. From here, the consulate will launch reforms and campaigns that redraw Europe's map. To consolidate power, the new regime needs swift military success. In May 1800, Bonaparte crosses the Great Saint Bernard, frees Milan, and defeats the Austrians at Marengo. By year's end, the victory at Hohenlinden opens the road to the Peace of Luneville, strengthening French influence in Italy and along the Rhine. With the Peace of Amiens in 1802, Europe enjoys a brief truce. The respite won on the battlefield gives Bonaparte the time to reorganize France in depth. By a law of 1800, the territory is divided into departments headed by prefects appointed by the central government, a system that concentrates power in Paris, curbs local autonomy, and ensures tight control over the whole country. On the religious front, the Concordat with Pope Pius VII, signed in 1801 and applied from 1802, ends a decade of state-church conflict. Catholicism is recognized as the religion of the majority of the French. Bishops are nominated by the government and paid by the state, and in return, the clergy swears loyalty to the Republic. In the economy, the creation of the Banque de France provides a stable base for credit and public finance, while in 1803, the introduction of the franc germinal establishes a sound monetary system, tied to defined gold and silver content, able to resist inflation. In education, the lycées are founded, secondary schools designed to train the future civil and military elite. The same logic guides the creation of the Légion d'honneur, an order of merit rewarding officers, officials, and citizens distinguished in service to the nation, regardless of social origin. In 1804, the state's reorganization finds legal form. On 21 March, the Civil Code takes effect, an organic body of rules governing property, contracts, marriage, inheritance, and individual rights. Intended to be clear and stable, it becomes a legal model for much of Europe, spreading across territories controlled or influenced by France. But that year is not only the triumph of reform, it is also a political turning point. After royalist plots against his life and the dramatic arrest and execution of the Duke of Enghien, Bonaparte decides to transform the consulate into an imperial monarchy. On 18 May, the Senate formally proclaims the empire, ending collegial rule. The climax comes on 2 December in Notre Dame. Before Pope Pius VII, summoned to consecrate the ceremony, Napoleon performs a gesture destined for legend. He takes the crown from the pontiff's hands and sets it on his own head. It is the sign that his authority depends on no one, not even the church. Less than 5 years have passed from the seizure of power to the imperial throne, and Napoleon's ascent has only begun. Europe's map is about to change again. In March 1796, Napoleon Bonaparte is just 26, with only a few months of notoriety and an army of about 40,000 men, underfed and poorly equipped. 2 days before departing for the front, he married Josephine, and now he must face Austrian and Piedmontese armies that outmatch him in artillery and cavalry. In less than 2 years, he will redraw the map of Italy, win 18 battles, and sign a treaty that reshapes Europe. But how did a young general with such limited means overturn an entire theater of war and turn the weak army of Italy into a machine capable of defeating 4 consecutive Austrian offensives? In March 1796, northern Italy is a mosaic of states with opposing interests. To the west lies the Kingdom of Sardinia, comprising Piedmont and Savoy, ruled by Victor Amadeus III. To the east, Lombardy is an integral part of the Habsburg Empire, administered from Vienna and held by strong garrisons. To the south, the Republic of Genoa maintains a fragile neutrality, but revolutionary France views this route as the most direct way to strike at Austria's heart. 2 Allied armies operate in the field. The Austrian army of Field Marshal Johann Peter Beaulieu, a 67-year-old veteran of 18th century wars, about 32,000 men, is deployed between Lombardy and eastern Liguria, with garrisons in Milan and along the Adda. The Piedmontese army of General Mitchell Coley, about 20,000 soldiers, defends the Apennine line from Seva to Quenum, protecting access to Turin. A stark contrast with the 26-year-old Napoleon now preparing to challenge them. The 2 forces join along a line linking the hills of Savona to the Ligurian mountains. It is a front hard to dislodge, yet vulnerable at one point, the so-called Hidge at Cairo Montenot, where the Austrian sector ends and the Piedmontese sector begins. If that knot falls, cooperation between the 2 armies breaks. On 27 March 1796, in Nice, Napoleon Bonaparte assumes command of the Army of Italy. The same day, through his Chief of Staff Louis-Alexandre Berthier, he summons 3 senior divisional generals: General Mathieu Philibert Serrurier, Pierre-François Charles Augereau, and André Massena. During the meeting, the first tasks are assigned, and the start of operations is set for 15 April, a secondary front for Paris compared with the Rhine. The war against the coalition has been underway since 1792, and the Directory has set the objectives: defeat the Austrians and force the Piedmont to make peace. Napoleon does not decide when the conflict begins, but he has full freedom in how to conduct it. He commands 38,000 men, veterans of the Revolutionary Wars, poorly equipped but well trained. His plan is simple and direct: strike the hinge, split the Allies, and fight them separately, using the mobility of French columns to concentrate strength where the enemy is weakest. After taking command at Nice, Napoleon quickly moves headquarters to Albenga and, on 9 April, to Savona. The objective is to strike Carcare, the weak point of the Austro-Piedmontese hinge, to sever the alliance for good. The main maneuver calls for Massena's division to descend from the Cataboni Pass, the Carcare, and join Augereau's division, marching from Finaligra through Tovo San Giacomo for a combined attack. In parallel, Serrier must move toward Ornea to engage the Piedmontese flank, while Generals Macquard and Garnier, with 6,800 men, head toward Coeno to distract Colli. On the Mediterranean front, part of La Harpe's division is ordered to take Sassello, while the rest cooperates with Jean-Baptiste Cervoni, commanding a brigade at Voltri to threaten Genoa and suggest a possible direct attack on the city. The start date is set for 15 April, but an unforeseen move changes everything. On 11 April, Field Marshal Beaulieu, worried by the weakness of Cervoni's brigade at Voltri, acts first. 2 Austrian columns cross the Bocetta Pass and the Turchino Pass to outflank the French position, while General Jean-Pierre d'Argenteau, an Austrian commander under Beaulieu, must descend from the hills towards Savona to isolate Massena and La Harpe. Cervoni, heavily outnumbered, orders an orderly retreat to avoid needless losses. For Napoleon, this is the moment to strike. He now knows Beaulieu's position and understands the Austrian command will need time to rejoin the Piedmontese. He therefore brings the attack forward by 4 days and launches the operation against Montenotte. On 12 April, La Harpe's and Massena's division engage Argenteau's troops near Cairo-Montenotte. About 13,000 French confront Austrian detachments clearly inferior in number and scattered over the ground. The French attack is swift and coordinated. The enemy front collapses, and the line linking the Austrians and Piedmontese is severed. Losses are limited, some hundreds on each side, but the strategic impact is enormous. The hinge no longer exists. Beaulieu and Colli are forced to fight on separate axes, while Napoleon can now apply his preferred method: concentrate superior force against one opponent at a time. After Montenotte, Napoleon moves immediately to consolidate success and prevent Austrians and Piedmontese from regrouping. The priority is to hit Colli and block any Austrian junction. On 13 April, France advance guards reach Millesimo, a small town in the Bormida Valley, where Savoyard forces try to slow the advance. In this clash, the Piedmontese suffer about 600 casualties, dead and wounded, against roughly 400 French. But the real obstacle lies slightly higher. The fortress of Coseria, a hilltop castle held by about 900 Austro-Piedmontese grenadiers. Augereau is sent there and meets unexpected resistance. French assaults, under enemy fire and up steep slopes, break repeatedly. The garrison, though isolated, manages to inflict heavy losses, over 300 men, before surrendering on 15 April. Coseria becomes a nail driven into the flank of the maneuver, delaying the push towards Seva. Meanwhile, to the northeast, Massena is ordered to strike at Dego to cut Austrian communications. There, he encounters well-entrenched imperial units that block the road. Napoleon realizes time works against him. If Beaulieu restores contact with Colli, the advantage won at Montenotte will vanish. On 14 and 15 April, Napoleon masses his forces at Dego. After 2 days of hard fighting, the French stormed the position, capturing about 5,000 prisoners and 19 guns, and inflicting more than 2,000 casualties, dead and wounded, on the Austrians, against roughly 900 French losses. It is a heavy blow for the Imperials, worsened by the loss of 10 battalions. A curious episode follows. Part of Massena's troops, busy looting, is surprised by a sortie led by the Austrian general Vukasovic. An enraged Napoleon has to restore discipline in person. On 15 April, the Caesarea garrison, left isolated, surrenders. The accumulated delays, however, allow Colli to fall back to safer positions. Even so, the operation has achieved its strategic aim. The Austrians are pushed back, and the Piedmontese remain isolated. After the success of the Montagnat, Millesimo, and Dago, Napoleon turns his attention to General Colli and the Piedmontese army, still deployed to defend Ceva. The goal is to force them to fight alone before Austrian reinforcements can arrive. French columns move to envelop the Savoyard positions. On 16 April, an initial probing attack causes about 150 Piedmontese casualties, around 50 French, a sign that Colli intends to defend stubbornly. On 19 April, Napoleon orders a combined attack. Serrier is to strike frontally, while Augereau must cross the Tonaro to outflank the enemy's right. However, Augereau cannot find a usable ford, and Serrier, left without support, is forced to halt his men. French losses in this failed attack are estimated at around 300, while the Piedmontese lose about 250. Realizing that supply lines over the Catabona Pass are too exposed, Napoleon orders a new route opened from the upper Taranto Valley to Ormia, allowing troops to be shifted from secondary sectors to the main front. This logistical move, seemingly minor, enables the French to keep an operational tempo higher than the Piedmontese even in mountainous, difficult terrain. Colli, aware of the risk of being trapped, avoids a decisive battle. During the night of 20 to 21 April, he withdraws the army toward Mondovi, losing about 200 men in rearguard skirmishes. The retreat, though orderly, leaves the French free to approach the Piedmontese plain. Napoleon would later describe, in a message to Paris, the maneuver through Ormia as one of the most elegant moves in the art of war. At dawn on 21 April 1796, Colli's Piedmontese rearguard is caught by French cavalry along the road to Mondovi. The pursuit is relentless. The cavalry, however, loses General Henry Christian Michael Strangier, mortally wounded in combat, a hard blow for the Army of Italy. General Serrier is the first to engage the enemy. The Piedmontese, around 8,000 men, are well placed along the Taranto and protected by hilly ground. Napoleon orders a coordinated attack. The infantry fixes the center, while mobile detachments attempt to turn the Savoyard right. In a few hours of fighting the French, about 12,000 men inflict around 800 casualties, dead, wounded, and prisoners, while taking roughly 600 themselves. The break comes when French infantry sees elevated positions dominating the routes of retreat toward Cuneo. To avoid encirclement, Colli orders a general withdrawal onto the plain. In the chaos, part of the Piedmontese artillery is abandoned and captured. The capture of Mondovi delivers to the French magazines full of food, ammunition, and equipment, sharply easing logistical strain. According to some French officers, the rations issued in the following days were the most abundant since leaving Nice. Victory has an immediate effect on morale. Napoleon now has access to the Piedmontese plain and can threaten Turin directly. Colli knows that without Austrian support, he cannot withstand another pitched battle. As Napoleon advances, the Piedmontese command opens talks for an armistice. After Mondovì, the army of Italy advances rapidly towards Turin. On 23 April, Napoleon is within marching distance of the Savoyard capital. The situation for the Kingdom of Sardinia is critical. The Piedmontese army has been beaten in the open, has lost access to the natural defenses of the Apennines, and cannot count on the timely arrival of Austrian reinforcements. That same evening, Colli opens negotiations requesting an armistice. Napoleon agrees to proceed only after securing control of key positions. Massena occupies Cherasco and Augereau enters Alba, completing the separation between the Piedmontese and Austrians. On 28 April 1796, Victor Amadeus III signs the Armistice of Cherasco. The agreement provides for the cession of Queno, Seva, and Alessandria, as well as free passage for French troops towards Austrian Lombardy. In practice, Piedmont leaves the war, and Napoleon gains full security on his western flank. In just 10 days of operations, the army of Italy has suffered about 6,000 losses, but has neutralized an opposing force of roughly 20,000 men. The signing takes place in a noble residence. Napoleon sends reports to Paris on the speed of the campaign, claiming that the war was decided before the enemy realized he had lost. The Armistice of Cherasco is more than a tactical victory. It marks Napoleon's first great political and military triumph in Italy and opens the way to the next phase of the campaign, the race into the Po Plain and Austrian Lombardy. In 10 days of operations, Napoleon Bonaparte transformed a poorly equipped army into a force capable of delivering a decisive defeat to the Kingdom of Sardinia. With Cherasco, Piedmont exits the war. France's western flank is secure, and the gates of the Po Plain are thrown open. It is the first great step in a campaign that will change Italy's political map forever. Ahead of Napoleon lie the Po River, Austrian rearguards, and a challenge destined to become legend, the bridge at Lodi. After the lightning victory at Mondovì, the Kingdom of Sardinia is forced to bow. At Cherasco, between 23 and 28 April, Victor Amadeus III signs an armistice. Queno, Seva, and Alessandria fall into French hands. The gates of Lombardy swing open, and Bonaparte, secure on his western flank, is free to concentrate the entire army of Italy against Field Marshal Johann Peter Bollio, commander of the Austrian forces in Italy. The objective is clear: destroy the imperial army before it withdraws beyond the great natural barriers of the plain, the Po, the Adda, and the Adige, and slips away from a decisive battle. But how will he, with a worn army and inferior numbers, cross guarded rivers, bend enemy rearguards, and turn every maneuver into a masterclass of tactics and strategic vision? On 28 April, he orders La Harpe to move on Aqui-Terme, about 45 kilometers as the crow flies, following the Arrow Valley. But mutinies, sparked by hunger, slow the column. It arrives only on the 30th, when the Imperials have already slipped the noose of encirclement. To keep up the pace and guarantee supplies, Bonaparte concentrates 39,600 men between Tortona, Alessandria, and Valencia on the Po. Here he stages a double feint. From Valenza, he sends patrols towards the nearest fords, pretending an immediate crossing. Farther north, he lets rumors leak of a possible passage over the Ticino to strike directly at Milan. In reality, the main march heads east, towards Piacenza, where the river is less guarded. A shift of more than 60 kilometers that lands him on the north bank of the Po, far from the expected defenses, forcing Boglio to hurry his retreat behind the Adda and then the Adige. On 7 May at 9 in the morning, Claude Delamain's picked column, 3,600 grenadiers and 2,500 light cavalry, reaches Piacenza. There, the French requisition local barges and boats to throw, in a few hours, a pontoon bridge able to carry infantry, cavalry, and artillery. Delamain is the first to cross and establish a bridgehead on the north bank of the Po. In the afternoon, La Harpe's division joins him. The Austrian General Liffe holds the bridges of Pavia and watches the fords of the Adda. Boglio, who has not fallen for the French feint at Valenza, hurries to reunite his columns to cover the retreat. Between 7 and 9 May, the French consolidate their position and take Fombio. Meanwhile, Auguero crosses the Po at Verato as well, shifting farther east to stretch the front and threaten the enemy flank. During the night of the 7th to the 8th, at Codogno, skirmishes sow confusion in the French ranks. In the chaos, La Harpe is mistakenly killed by his own men's fire. The chief of staff, Louis-Alexandre Berthier, takes control, restores the chain of command, and beats back the imperial advance guards that try to drive the French back over the Po. At dawn, on 10 May, the French vanguard reaches Lodi. On the far bank of the Adda, Austrian General Karl Philipp Sebottendorf has posted about 10,000 men with 12 guns covering the bridge. Bonaparte arrays his artillery along the south bank and sends Ordonners and Beaumont's cavalry to seek fords upstream and downstream to turn the position. The Grenadiers' first assault stalls halfway across under enemy fire. The second, led by Delamain and Cervone, breaks through. At that very moment, the cavalry that has found a ford falls on the Austrian rearguard's flank, forcing it to withdraw. The victory at Lodi does not annihilate Boglio's army, but it opens Lombardy to Bonaparte. It is proof of an audacious method. Concentrate force on a crucial point, combine frontal attack with envelopment, and break resistance through the speed of action. Five days after Lodi, on 15 May, Bonaparte enters Milan. The city opens its gates without fighting, but the Castello Sforzesco remains in Austrian hands and continues to resist. In those days, an unexpected message arrives from Paris. The Directory wants to split command of the Army of Italy with General Kellerman. The proposal enrages Bonaparte, who threatens to resign. The Directory backs down, and on 21 May confirms full confidence in him, also sending 10,000 reinforcements. While preparing the march against Boglio, Napoleon must tackle an internal problem. On 25 and 26 May, uprisings break out in Milan and Pavia and are swiftly suppressed. At Binasco, a village south of the capital, the rebels are scattered and houses are burned. The aim is to restore order quickly and secure lines of communication and supply. With the internal crisis resolved, Bonaparte moves against Boglio, who has deployed his 28,000 men beyond the Mincio, left flank shielded by Lake Garda and right by the Po. On 30 May, Bonaparte launches the decisive operation to force the river. He orders a feint toward Peschiera del Garda to draw Austrian attention there, while the real blow lands farther south at Borghetto, near Valleggio sul Mincio, where the crossing is less defended. Once the bridge at Borghetto is secured, French advance guards sweep aside local defenses and open the gap. Caught by surprise, the Austrians hastily fall back behind the Adige to avoid encirclement. Exploiting the breach, Massena enters Verona. Serrier seizes Castelnuovo del Garda and moves on Mantua, while Argiro advances to the northeast to cover the French left. Mantua, ringed by lakes and protected by stout earthworks, is one of Italy's strongest forces and controls direct access to the Tyrol. Bonaparte wants it at once. On 3 June, he assigns Serrier about 10,000 men to invest the city, where roughly 12,000 Austrians are holed up. The Lombard Plain is now almost entirely French, but the Austrian field army is not yet destroyed. Vienna prepares a counterstroke from the Tyrol to reopen the road to Mantua. At the end of July, Vienna changes strategy. Dagobert von Wurmser gathers about 50,000 men at Trento to relieve Mantua. Bonaparte refuses to be crushed between Lake Garda and the Adige. On 31 July, he raises the siege and concentrates his divisions to meet the enemy columns separately. West of Gardia, General Kastanovich descends the Val Sabbia, opens Salo, and advances towards Brescia. To the east, Wurmser approaches the Mincio. On 3 and 4 August, fighting rages between the Salo, Desenzano, and Lonato. Massena exploits the enemy's dispersal and forces Kastanovich to fall back. On 5 August, at Castiglione della Stiviere, the combined actions of Augereau, Marmont, and Massena deals Wurmser a clear defeat. On 7 August, the French retake Verona and resume the siege of Mantua. The price is heavy, about 6,000 killed and wounded and 4,000 prisoners, but Austrian losses exceed 16,700. In September, Austria launches a fresh offensive. On the 4th, at Rovereto, Massena and Valbois defeat Davidovich and open the road along the Upper Adige. Wurmser, instead of staying in the Tyrol, descends the Brenta Valley to outflank the French. On 7 September, Augereau passes Primolano. On the 8th, at Bassano del Grappa, the French break the defenses and split the Austrian army in two. One part retreats towards Friuli, the other, with Wurmser, heads for Mantua. On 10 September, Wurmser slips past the French cordon, crosses the Adige, and on the 12th enters Mantua, raising the garrison to about 23,000 men. 3 days later, before the fortifications of San Giorgio and the Favorita, Austrian sorties are repelled by Massena and Saguet. Wurmser remains trapped inside the fortress, already strained. The arrival of thousands more men only deepens the crisis brought on by shortages. Bonaparte can return to maneuver in the open, awaiting the next offensive Austria is already planning. At the start of November, Austria entrusts the third offensive to Joseph Alvensi von Berberich, an experienced artillery marshal called to replace Wurmser after the summer's failures. With about 28,000 men, he moves from the Piave toward Verona, while from the Tyrol, General Paul Davidovich descends with 18,000 along the Adige Valley to strike from the north. The aim is to catch Bonaparte in a pincer and free Mantua. Bonaparte must split his forces. He tasks Valbois with containing Davidovich, deploys Massena between Vicenza and Bassano, and keeps Augereau in reserve at Verona. On 6 November, in the 2nd Bassano, some 19,500 French crash into Alvensi's divisions and are repulsed, suffering about 3,000 losses against 2,800 Austrian. The next day, at Cagliano, Davidovich inflicts a severe defeat on Valbois. 4,400 French losses against 3,500 Austrian. Bonaparte pulls troops back toward Verona to prevent the two enemy columns from joining. On 11 November, Avenzi's guard enters Caldiero. On the 12th, under rain and hail, Bonaparte attempts a frontal attack. Massena on the right, Auguero on the left. Austrian positions, anchored on villages and heights, hold firm. By day's end, the French count about 1,800 losses, including 800 prisoners and 2 guns, against 1,300 Austrian. Victory at Caldiero gives Alfonsi the illusion that he holds the initiative. After Caldiero, Bonaparte decides to surprise Alfonsi by striking his southern flank. In the night of 14 to 15 November, he concentrates his troops at Verona and marches towards Ronco on the Adige. At dawn, he builds a pontoon bridge and sends about 18,000 men across, entering the narrow strip between the Adige and the Alpone, a maze of embankments and canals where marshy ground hampers large movements and can nullify the Austrian numerical advantage. The battle unfolds over 3 days. 15 November, first day. Auguero advances along the levee toward the bridge of Arcole, but fire from Austrian positions stops him. To outflank the enemy, Bonaparte dispatches General Gouye with 3,000 to find a ford at Abelardre. By late afternoon, he enters Arcole. However, news that Valboy has been driven back at Busolengo prompts Bonaparte to bring all troops back to the left bank of the Adige to shield Verona. 16 November, second day. The French recross Adige and resume the offensive. Porciel is taken, but the bridge of Arcole remains in Austrian hands. At the mouth of the Alpone, General Vial attempts a crossing and is halted. Meanwhile, 3,000 reinforcements sent by Kilmaine arrive from Verona to stiffen the effort, but the situation remains deadlocked. 17 November, third day. Bonaparte seeks to end the battle with a decisive stroke. He prepares the final action to break Arcole's defenses and force Alfonsi to retreat. Massena places a brigade conspicuously on the road between Arcole and Porciel to draw part of the garrison out, while the rest of his troops lie hidden in the vegetation. Farther south, Auguero moves towards Legnago to threaten Austrian lines of retreat. At this, Bonaparte orders a coup de théâtre. A small detachment of mounted guides and 4 trumpeters ford the Alpone behind the enemy and sound the charge, suggesting the arrival of a large force. Panic grips the Austrians, who abandon Arcole. The victory at Arcole cost the French about 4,500 killed and wounded. The Austrians lose roughly 7,000 men. In a few months, Napoleon crushed Piedmont, seized Lombardy, isolated Mantua, and imposed treaties on dukes and popes. Yet the army of Italy was poorly equipped and almost always outnumbered. His strength lay not in resources, but in a new way of war. Rapid marches, flexible divisions able to reunite in a flash, ruthless use of terrain, and the will to annihilate the enemy, not merely drive him back. With these methods, he forced passages over the Adige, the Tagliamento, and the Julian Alps, pushed the army of Italy into Carinthia, and even provoked the fall of the millennial Republic of Venice. Now Vienna, heart of the Habsburg Empire, is within reach. All Europe wonders if a 27-year-old general can truly strike the capital. But what will halt Bonaparte at Vienna's gates? And how will he turn this advance into a new political order sealed at the Treaty of Campo Formio? After Arcole, Austria does not yield. Mantua is still under siege, and Vienna prepares one last attempt to save it. Winter does not stop the armies, while diplomacy falls. The French envoy, Henry Clark, cannot sway the emperor, determined not to negotiate until Mantua is resupplied. Field Marshal Joseph Alvinzi prepares a fourth offensive. If he breaks the siege, the war resumes. If he fails, northern Italy will remain French. At the start of January 1797, Napoleon fields about 34,000 men and another 10,000 tied down at Mantua, with 78 guns. The Austrians, with 45,000 effectives, hold numerical superiority. To cover every possible axis of attack, Bonaparte places Joubert on the Rivoli plateau, Massena in reserve at Verona, Augureau further south along the Adige, and Ray guarding the Garda's western shore. The ground makes the test even harsher. To the west lies Lake Garda, to the east the Adige, and between them a plateau hemmed by gorges and mountains. Monte Baldo, Monte Magnone, the Osteria Gorge. Whoever controls these passages commands the campaign. Bonaparte knows it. If Rivoli falls, the siege of Mantua is lost. On 8 January, skirmishes among the Adige reveal imperial movement. On the 11th, Bonaparte shifts his headquarters from Roverbella to manage the crisis up close. On the 12th, the attack is laid bare. Alvinzi massed 28,000 men against Rivoli, yet makes a fatal mistake by splitting them into 6 columns trudging through rough terrain with poor communications. At dawn, on 14 January, the first Austrian vanguards clash with Joubert. The Imperials press on every front. The Osteria Gorge falls. Montmagone is taken, and Lusignan appears to the south, threatening the French rear. The position seems to collapse. Then a lucky shot changes everything. A French gun hits 2 enemy ammunition wagons. The blast throws the advancing columns into chaos. Leclerc and LaSalle lead a handful, about 500, and take the Osteria Gorge. Bonaparte seizes the instant. Massena crashes in with the reserves onto the heights and halts Liffey and Koblos, while Ray, arriving from the south, bars Lusignan's road. By nightfall on the 14th, the tables are turned. From a dangerous trap, Rivoli becomes the grave of the imperial offensive. Next day, 15 January, Joubert completes the breakthrough on the La Corona positions, while the cavalry of Murat and Vial seizes the mountain passes and blocks the retreat. The result is devastating: roughly 3,000 dead and 11,000 prisoners. The Battle of Rivoli is no mere victory. It is Napoleon's first true battle of annihilation. The imperial field army is destroyed, the siege of Mantua is secured, and the army of Italy prepares to deliver the coup de grace. As Alvinzi reels from Rivoli, another threat moves along the Adige. General Provera makes a desperate bid. With about 9,000 men, he fords the river and heads straight for Mantua to link up with Wurmser's garrison. It is Austria's last hope of breaking the siege. On 16th January, Provera reaches the city's eastern suburbs, only to find a ring now closed. To the west stands Serrier commanding the siege. From the south comes Augureau, and Bonaparte, fresh from Rivoli, rushes in to tighten the noose. Within hours, Provera is surrounded and compelled to surrender. Wurmser's final sortie falls as well. Mantua remains isolated. A few days later, on 2 February, the fortress capitulates. The Austrians receive the honors of war. About 16,000 soldiers march out in parade. The senior staff is allowed to return free to imperial territory, while the rest are taken prisoner. By the custom of the day, these men give their parole not to fight France again for at least a year. With Mantua in French hands, northern Italy is firmly under control. The echo of victory spreads across Europe. The Army of Italy, born ill-equipped and hungry, has withstood 4 offensives and brought down the peninsula's greatest Habsburg stronghold. For valor at Rivoli and Castiglione, Andrea Massena is created Duke of Rivoli. Later, in Paris, his name will grace one of the city's most famous streets, Rue de Rivoli, running beside the Louvre, named for the victory that sealed Napoleon's first great campaign. Mantua's fall marks the end of the Lombard campaign. Nothing now prevents Bonaparte from carrying the war into Habsburg's lands. On 2 February 1797, while Austrian units file out of Mantua in surrender, Bonaparte wastes no time. He detaches about 9,000 men from the Army of Italy and leads them into Romagna. The aim is to secure the rear and settle accounts with the Papal States, which had supported Austria with money and arms. The march is swift and menacing. Faced with the French advance, Pope Pius VI has no choice. On 19 February at Tolentino, he is forced to sign a humiliating treaty. Rome must pay heavy indemnities, cede the legations of Bologna, Ferrara, and Romagna, and hand over to France a share of its most prestigious works of art, destined for Paris. For the Army of Italy, the treaty is momentous. The rear is quiet at last. French coffers fill, and the soldiers see their hardship rewarded with arrears of pay. Above all, Bonaparte can now turn northeast, sure he has no threats behind him. Thus, while French troops enjoy the spoils and officers ship statues and masterpieces to stock the Louvre, the general's attention shifts to a larger objective: Austria itself. The Directory backs its winner. Men and resources flow to Bonaparte's Army of Italy. By March, he commands about 60,000 troops, an army that a year earlier was hungry and ill-equipped, now ready to carry the war into the Habsburg heartland. The objective is bold: Vienna. On 1 March, the French cross the Brenta, seize Primo-Liano, and advance in multiple columns. Within days, they press Archduke Charles, who tries to hold Friuli with about 50,000 effectives. The decisive moment comes on 16 March, when Bonaparte orders the crossing of the Tagliamento. It is a difficult ford under enemy fire, but Bernadotte's vanguard forces the river, captures 500 prisoners and 6 guns, and drives Charles back on Udine. Next day, 17 March, an entire Austrian column is surrounded and surrenders at Gradisca di Isonzo. The Austrians fall back on the passes. Between 21 and 23 March, in the mountains around Tarvisio, the French strike again. The Imperials lose more than 5,000 men and 32 guns, taken in the Alpine gorges. At the same time, Jobert's column, coming from the Tyrol, takes Bolzano and Bressanone, opening another road towards Austria. The chase does not stop. On 23rd March, General Dugua enters Trieste, depriving the empire of a key Adriatic port. On 29 March, the French occupy Klagenfurt. From there, Bonaparte writes directly to Archduke Charles, urging him to halt the useless bloodshed, a gesture that proclaims the victor's confidence and the empire's weakness. At the start of April, the French advance guards already on the Semmering, a step from Vienna, the Austrians ask for a truce. On 7 April, at Leoben, a brief armistice is signed. On 16 to 17 April, it hardens into the preliminaries of Leoben, the political accord that foreshadows the future Treaty of Campo Formio. The campaign that seemed impossible a year earlier has become an irresistible march. Vienna has trembled. The army of Italy has come within a step of the empire's heart. While the preliminaries are signed in the north, the rear army of Italy erupts. Between 17 and 25 April, Verona arises and the Pass Veronese. Citizens and insurgents take up arms against French garrisons in days of massacre. The repression is harsh, and Bonaparte seizes the moment. He accuses the Republic of Venice of fomenting the disorders and declares its neutrality over. It is the perfect pretext that sends La Serenissimi's fate. On 12 May 1797, after more than a millennium, the Republic of St. Mark collapses. The Great Council deposes Doge Ludovico Manon and hands power to a provisional government, but the city's destiny is already set. As the old republic disappears, new states of Bonaparte's making arise in Italy. In June, with a political coup in Genoa, the Ligurian Republic is born, modeled on the French Directory. Days later, on 29 June, the Cisalpine Republic is proclaimed in Milan, uniting the Transpadane and the Cispadane. On 8 July, the Cisalpine adopts a French-style constitution, divides the land into departments, and introduces conscription, turning itself into a modern, militarized state. In a few weeks, the political map of northern Italy changes. In place of ancient republics and regional states emerge sister republics, satellites of France. The impact is immense. The north becomes a political laboratory and a military base for future wars. After months of marching and negotiation, the endpoint arrives on 17 October 1797. At Campo Formio, near Udine, Bonaparte and the Austrian plenipotentiary Cobenzl sign the treaty that closes the campaign and redraws Europe's map. France gains what it had pursued for years: the Austrian Netherlands, Belgium, the left bank of the Rhine, and the confirmation of its control over the Italian sister republics, now firmly in the French orbit. In exchange, Austria receives the Republic of Venice with Istria and Dalmatia, as well as compensations in Germany. The political shock is immense. La Serenissima, alive for over 1,000 years, vanishes from the maps, while Milan and Genoa become the new centers of pro-French Republican power. Northern Italy is no longer a mosaic of states, but a belt of satellite republics, military bases, and political laboratories ready to sustain France in future wars. Campo Formio also seals the end of the first coalition between France and Austria. The echo of Napoleon's triumph rolls across Europe. In just over a year, a 27-year-old general with an army that began hungry and ill-equipped has shattered 4 Austrian offensives, forced Mantua to surrender, humbled popes and dukes, and pushed his advance guards to the very threshold of Vienna. The treaty is the final signature on this transformation. Italy is no longer the Habsburg periphery, but the heart of France's new strategy.
In the late 18th century, Europe was a continent in turmoil, marked by the upheaval of the French Revolution and the subsequent rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon, a brilliant military strategist and leader, rapidly expanded his influence and control across Europe. By the end of the century, his campaigns had transformed the political landscape. Starting with his stunning victories in Italy, he conquered vast territories, including parts of Austria, the Low Countries, and the Italian peninsula. His bold strategies and relentless ambition turned the French Republic into a dominant European power. The expansion of Napoleon's empire set the stage for his grand ambitions, including his decision to embark on an audacious campaign in Egypt. Understanding this context is crucial to appreciating why Napoleon, at the height of his power, would turn his attention to the distant and ancient land of Egypt. One of Napoleon's primary strategic goals for the Egyptian campaign was to disrupt British trade routes to India. By capturing Egypt, Napoleon aimed to weaken Britain's economic strength by cutting off its crucial trade access to India. This strategic move was intended to cripple Britain's economy, thereby reducing its ability to fund coalitions against France. Additionally, controlling Egypt would provide France with a strategic foothold in the eastern Mediterranean. This would not only bolster French naval power in the region, but also serve as a base for future operations in the Middle East. By establishing a strong presence in Egypt, Napoleon sought to challenge British dominance on the high seas and assert French influence in a region of immense geopolitical importance. By capturing Egypt, Napoleon sought to turn the region into a French stronghold, controlling the passage to the east and asserting dominance over the Mediterranean. Egypt was seen as a land of immense potential wealth and resources. Napoleon believed that by controlling Egypt, France could open new economic opportunities, including lucrative trade routes and access to valuable resources. Napoleon envisioned Egypt as a key economic asset that would strengthen France's economy and reduce reliance on European resources. Expanding French influence was a key objective for Napoleon. By establishing a stronghold in Egypt, he aimed to extend French power beyond Europe and into the Middle East, a region of immense strategic importance. Napoleon's move into Egypt was also a preemptive strike against the Ottoman Empire, which controlled the region. This would weaken the Ottomans and prevent them from threatening French interests. By controlling Egypt, Napoleon sought to project French power, counter British influence, and reshape the political landscape of the region in favor of France. Napoleon's ambition and quest for personal glory played a significant role in his decision to invade Egypt. He saw the campaign as a way to enhance his reputation and achieve military greatness on an international stage. Napoleon was also inspired by the Enlightenment ideals of scientific exploration. He brought along scholars and scientists to study Egypt's ancient culture, aiming to contribute to French and European knowledge. The allure of ancient Egypt, with its rich history and magnificent monuments, fascinated Napoleon and many Europeans. Conquering Egypt connected France to this ancient civilization, enhancing its cultural heritage. Napoleon's expedition to Egypt began with meticulous planning. He assembled a fleet and a formidable army of around 35,000 soldiers, accompanied by over 150 scientists, engineers, and scholars. This grand expedition set sail from Toulon, France, on May 19, 1798. The fleet traveled across the Mediterranean, avoiding the British Royal Navy commanded by Admiral Horatio Nelson, which was actively patrolling the waters. Despite an unexpected stop in Sardinia due to adverse weather and supply issues, Napoleon's strategic navigation led them to Malta. When the Knights of Malta refused Napoleon's request to land and resupply, he decided to attack, capturing the island and securing a vital stronghold. After securing Malta, the fleet continued its journey towards Egypt, eventually landing in Alexandria on July 1, 1798. The arrival marked the beginning of the campaign, as Napoleon's forces quickly moved to secure key positions in the city. Napoleon's swift movements in Egypt were crucial for establishing a strong foothold. He aimed to secure Alexandria and quickly move inland to Cairo, engaging local forces and consolidating French control over key strategic points. Upon landing in Alexandria on July 1, 1798, Napoleon's first objective was to secure the city and establish a base for further operations. The French forces quickly moved to take control of Alexandria's key positions, encountering minimal resistance. This swift takeover allowed Napoleon to plan his advance towards Cairo. Marching through the harsh desert conditions, Napoleon's forces encountered the Mamluks, the ruling military caste of Egypt, led by Murad Bey. The decisive Battle of the Pyramids on July 21, 1798, showcased Napoleon's military genius. Using the divisional square tactic, the French defeated the numerically superior Mamluk forces, securing a critical victory. The victory at the Battle of the Pyramids not only solidified French control over Cairo, but also demoralized the Mamluk forces, leading to the rapid collapse of their resistance. Napoleon's entry into Cairo was marked by both celebration and strategic fortification. However, the French occupation of Cairo was soon challenged by the British naval victory at the Battle of the Nile on August 1, 1798. Admiral Horatio Nelson's fleet destroyed the French fleet anchored in Aboukir Bay, cutting off Napoleon's supply lines and trapping his army in Egypt. Despite being cut off, Napoleon continued his campaigns in Egypt, aiming to consolidate control and fend off Ottoman counterattacks. He marched towards the port city of Jaffa, securing it after a brief but brutal siege, and then proceeded to advance towards Syria. Napoleon's campaign in Egypt, marked by rapid military movements and strategic brilliance, faced significant challenges due to isolation and continuous threats from the Ottoman Empire and British forces. Yet, it highlighted his tactical prowess and ambition to extend French influence far beyond Europe. One unique aspect of Napoleon's Egyptian campaign was the inclusion of the Commission des Sciences et des Arts, a group of over 150 scientists, engineers, and scholars. Inspired by Enlightenment ideals, they aimed to document and study Egypt's rich history, culture, and natural resources. This scientific expedition embarked on a comprehensive exploration, cataloging ancient monuments, studying the flora and fauna, and examining the Nile's irrigation systems. Their most significant discovery was the Rosetta Stone in 1799, which became key to deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphs. This artifact unlocked the secrets of an ancient civilization and was a major milestone in Egyptology. The findings were later published in a multi-volume Description de l'Égypte, profoundly influencing European knowledge and interest in Egypt. Napoleon's integration of scientific exploration with military conquest demonstrated his ambition to advance human knowledge alongside French dominance. Despite the initial successes, Napoleon's campaign in Egypt faced significant challenges. The harsh desert environment, disease, and supply shortages strained the French forces. Additionally, the local population's resistance and continuous Ottoman and British threats compounded the difficulties. The most significant setbacks was the British naval victory at the Battle of the Nile. Admiral Horatio Nelson's fleet destroyed the French fleet, cutting off Napoleon's supply lines and trapping his army in Egypt. Isolated and with dwindling resources, Napoleon decided to march towards Syria in early 1799 to preempt an Ottoman attack. However, the campaign was met with fierce resistance, particularly at the Siege of Acre, where Napoleon's forces were unable to breach the city's defenses. After failing to capture Acre, Napoleon returned to Egypt, facing an increasingly untenable situation. The combination of military setbacks, disease, and supply issues forced him to consider the viability of maintaining French presence in Egypt. Realizing the strategic impossibility of holding Egypt, Napoleon left his army in the command of General Jean-Baptiste Kleber and secretly returned to France in August 1799. His departure marked the end of his Egyptian adventure and the beginning of his focus on consolidating power in Europe. Napoleon's Egyptian campaign, though fraught with challenges and ultimate retreat, showcased his ambition and strategic thinking. It also left a lasting impact on both French military history and European knowledge of ancient Egypt. Napoleon's Egyptian campaign, driven by a mix of strategic, economic, political, and personal motives, remains a significant chapter in history. Although ultimately unsuccessful, it showcased Napoleon's ambition and military prowess. The expedition's scientific contributions, including the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, enriched European knowledge of ancient Egypt. Despite facing immense challenges and eventual retreat, the campaign left a lasting impact on both French military history and European cultural heritage. In 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte launched an invasion that would dramatically reshape Europe, a daring march into Russia with the largest army Europe had ever seen. This is the story of grand ambition, harsh elements, and a campaign that spiraled into disaster. At the dawn of the 19th century, Europe's landscape of power teetered on the edge of change. The Treaty of Tilsit, forged in 1807 between Napoleon Bonaparte and Tsar Alexander I, initially promised peace and mutual support against Britain. However, as the years passed, Russia chafed under the restrictions of Napoleon's continental system, which aimed to economically isolate Britain. The strains of these economic sanctions began to show. As Russian merchants grew desperate under the stifling trade conditions, Russian defiance in continuing trade with Britain not only sparked Napoleon's ire, but also highlighted the growing schism between the two empires. Viewing this as a direct challenge to his authority and a breach of their alliance, Napoleon's response was swift and decisive. By 1812, diplomatic ties had soured, prompting Napoleon to assemble an immense force aimed at bringing Russia back into line. This was not merely a military maneuver, it was a calculated statement of power, intended to secure Napoleon's dominance over Europe and punish any dissent. In preparation for his monumental campaign against Russia, Napoleon meticulously amassed the Grande Armée, one of the largest forces ever assembled in history, comprising over 600,000 men drawn from a myriad of nations under French control. This vast assembly was a testament to Napoleon's unmatched ability to mobilize and command a diverse and sprawling military coalition. Frenchmen stood shoulder to shoulder with Italians, Germans, Poles, Spaniards, and others, each contingent marked by its unique uniform and banners, adding a vivid patchwork of colors to the ranks. The logistical effort to supply and maintain such a massive force was unprecedented, involving extensive networks of supply wagons, vast quantities of food, and a continuous trail of support staff and artillery that stretched back to the heart of France. As the army surged eastward, the sheer scale of this operation showcased not just military might, but a deliberate display of power, intended to intimidate and enforce compliance from the Russian Tsar. On June 24, 1812, the Grande Armée crossed the Niemen River, marking the official start of Napoleon's invasion of Russia. As tens of thousands of troops filed across makeshift bridges under the cover of darkness, the enormity of the campaign began to unfold before their eyes. The river crossing was meticulously planned down to the last detail, yet it symbolized the first step into a vast and uncertain territory. Napoleon's confidence was high as he led his troops into Russian lands, spurred by visions of a swift victory that would not only secure his empire's eastern borders, but also firmly assert his dominance over Europe. However, this initial crossing, filled with determination and grandeur, was also the beginning of what would become one of the most grueling and devastating military campaigns in history. As Napoleon's Grande Armée advanced deeper into Russia, they encountered a strategy they were ill-prepared to face. The Russian army, under the skilled command of Generals Barclay de Tolly and later Mikhail Kutuzov, implemented a scorched earth policy, deliberately retreating while burning crops, villages, and resources. This calculated destruction left the French forces bereft of the necessary supplies or shelter, critically stretching their supply lines to dangerous lengths. Despite several tactical victories that showcased their military prowess, the French found little to sustain their massive, sprawling army. Moreover, the Russians also engaged in relentless guerrilla warfare, constantly harassing French units, ambushing them, and effectively cutting off stragglers. As winter approached, the combined effects of scant food and shelter, along with the onset of the harsh Russian winter, began to take a devastating toll on Napoleon's troops, sapping their strength and morale. On September 7, 1812, the Grande Armée faced the Russian forces in the fierce Battle of Borodino. the largest and bloodiest single-day action of the Napoleonic Wars. Just 70 miles west of Moscow, over 250,000 men clashed in a brutal struggle for control. Napoleon's forces, under his direct command, launched wave after wave of relentless assaults against the well-fortified Russian positions. Staunchly led by Marshal Kutuzov, the battlefield was soon enveloped in smoke and the din of combat, as both sides engaged in a desperate fight for supremacy. Despite suffering enormous casualties, with around 30,000 French and 40,000 Russians killed or wounded, neither side achieved a decisive victory. However, the French managed to capture the main positions on the battlefield. This Pyrrhic victory allowed Napoleon to march into Moscow, though it left his army critically weakened and far from defeating the resilient Russian forces. Despite the heavy toll of the Battle of Borodino, Napoleon's weakened army continued to push forward, entering Moscow on September 14, 1812. To their astonishment, they found the city nearly abandoned, a ghostly echo of its former self. The Russian command had strategically ordered a tactical retreat, leaving only a skeleton crew behind who set fires throughout the city. A desperate yet calculated act of defiance. The fires raged for days, destroying large parts of Moscow and further depriving the French forces of much-needed shelter and supplies. This strategic move left Napoleon's army in a dire situation, far from home and without the resources needed for the impending winter. As Napoleon waited in vain for a Russian surrender that would never come, the harsh Russian winter began to set in, compounding the already dire challenges faced by his troops, marking a turning point in the campaign. By October 1812, with Moscow in ruins and no Russian capitulation in sight, Napoleon was forced to order a retreat. The once mighty Grande Armée faced its most harrowing journey yet. As they retreated, the brutal cold, dwindling supplies, and the relentless Russian guerrilla attacks took a severe toll. The temperatures plunged as the army trudged through snow and ice. Starvation and disease decimated the ranks, while skirmishes with Russian forces mercilessly picked off those lagging behind. One of the most devastating moments came as they crossed the Berezina River in late November. Under dire conditions and fierce enemy fire, the crossing resulted in massive casualties, with approximately 25,000 to 30,000 men lost. This retreat was not just a military maneuver, it was a desperate fight for survival, with each step away from Moscow marking a deeper descent into despair and a catastrophic reduction in the army's numbers. The catastrophic retreat from Russia marked a pivotal moment in Napoleon's decline, signaling the crumbling of an empire that had once dominated the European continent. Out of the initial 600,000 men who began the campaign, fewer than 100,000 battled survivors staggered back into Allied territory, a stark testament to the harshness of the Russian winter and the relentless pursuit by Russian forces. The Grande Armée, once feared across Europe, was left shattered, its strength and morale irreparably damaged. The once invincible legions were now a shadow of their former selves, with their defeat sending shockwaves through Europe. This devastating loss emboldened nations previously subdued or hesitant to challenge Napoleon, leading to the formation of new coalitions against him. Nations like Britain, Russia, Prussia, Sweden, Austria, and several German states now saw a new opportunity to curb French influence. The disaster also ignited a wave of nationalism across Europe, particularly in Germany and Russia, catalyzing shifts towards independence and resistance. This newfound spirit of nationalism began reshaping the political landscape, setting the stage for future conflicts and realignments. Ultimately, the Russian campaign significantly weakened Napoleon's grip on power, setting the stage for his eventual abdication and the reshaping of European borders. The fall of Napoleon would usher in a new era of balance and diplomacy in Europe, marked by the Congress of Vienna, which sought to restore old boundaries and reduce the likelihood of such widespread conflict in the future. The Russian campaign of 1812, a monumental endeavor marked by ambition and hubris, stands as a stark lesson in the limits of military power. Napoleon's failed invasion not only shattered his Grande Armée, but also fundamentally altered the course of European history. It demonstrated the devastating effects of underestimating logistical challenges and the harsh realities of war. The resilience of the Russian people and their strategic use of scorched earth tactics redefined guerrilla warfare and inspired nations under the yoke of an empire to rise up. As we reflect on this pivotal chapter, we see how it paved the way for a new era in Europe, one where balance and coalition would become key in maintaining peace and reshaping nations. The Battle of Waterloo, described by the Duke of Wellington as the nearest run thing you ever saw, stands as a decisive moment that reshaped European politics. This conflict not only marked the culmination of a series of wars that ravaged the continent, but also set the stage for a new era of balance and stability. Here, the intricate maneuvers and strategic decisions of this battle will be explored, as each move held significant consequences for the future of Europe. In the early months of 1815, Europe was on edge. The continent had been shaken by over 2 decades of conflict, but with the abdication of Napoleon Bonaparte in April 1814 and his subsequent exile to the Mediterranean island of Elba, a fragile peace had begun to settle across the nations. This peace, however, was to be short-lived. In a daring escape in February 1815, Napoleon returned to France, igniting a dramatic resurgence of power known as the 100 Days. As he landed at Gulf Juan, the deposed emperor was greeted by cheering soldiers and citizens, quickly amassing an army as he marched towards Paris. By March, he had entered the capital, reclaiming his throne without firing a single shot, as the reigning King Louis XVIII fled. The return of Napoleon spurred the European powers into action. The Congress of Vienna, which had been in session since September 1814 to redraw the boundaries and politics of a post-Napoleonic Europe, quickly declared him an outlaw. In response, the Seventh Coalition was formed, uniting Britain, Prussia, Russia, Austria, and several smaller countries against him. Each of these powers began mobilizing their armies, determined to end Napoleon's rule once and for all. The strategic positioning prior to the battle was crucial. Napoleon knew he had to disrupt the Allied forces before they could consolidate. He aimed to separate the British, led by the Duke of Wellington, and the Prussians, under Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher, and defeat them individually. Wellington positioned his troops along a ridge near the village of Waterloo in Belgium, creating a defensive line that stretched from the Chateau of Hogemont in the west to the farm of Papillote to the east. His choice of high ground and fortified farmhouses strengthened his defensive posture. Meanwhile, Napoleon concentrated his forces south of Wellington's line, near the town of Charleroi. His plan was marked by characteristic audacity. By moving swiftly, he hoped to wedge his army between the British and Prussians, defeating Wellington before turning to face Blücher's forces, which were still en route. As both sides prepared for what they knew would be a decisive showdown, the stage was set for one of the greatest battles in European military history, with each commander aware that the outcome could reshape the continent's political landscape for generations to come. As the battle loomed, Napoleon's army, assembled with speed and precision, numbered around 73,000 troops. This formidable force comprised his loyal veterans from various elite regiments, including the revered Imperial Guard. Notably, the army was organized into several corps, each led by experienced marshals whom Napoleon trusted implicitly. Key figures included Marshal Ney, known for his fearless leadership, and Marshal Soult, a strategic mastermind, both critical to executing Napoleon's battle plans. Opposing Napoleon, the Duke of Wellington commanded an allied army of about 68,000 men. This coalition force was a diverse amalgam that included British, Dutch, and Belgian troops, as well as smaller contingents from various German principalities. Despite its diversity and the uneven experience among its ranks, Wellington's leadership was a unifying force. His strategic acumen was evident in his choice of terrain and defensive preparations, which utilized the ridge at Waterloo to maximize his army's effectiveness. Meanwhile, Prussian Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher led a force of 50,000 troops, positioned to join Wellington's forces. Known for his relentless pursuit and aggressive tactics, Blücher's role was pivotal. His forces were crucial in the Allied strategy, planning to support Wellington by attacking Napoleon's right flank, potentially turning the tide of the battle. The strategies of these commanders reflected their distinct military doctrines and personal experiences. Napoleon sought a swift, decisive victory to disrupt the coalition before it could fully assemble. In contrast, Wellington and Blücher aimed for a drawn-out battle, exploiting their growing numerical superiority and coordination. As these experienced leaders maneuvered their forces, they set the stage for a monumental confrontation. The upcoming clash at Waterloo promised not only to determine the fate of these armies, but also to reshape the political landscape of Europe for decades to come. As dawn broke on June 18, 1815, the atmosphere was tense with the imminent conflict. Napoleon initiated the battle by ordering an artillery barrage against Wellington's forces, positioned along the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean. This preliminary bombardment was meant to soften up the Allied defenses before the main assault. As the cannonade echoed across the battlefield, Napoleon's troops prepared for their first major maneuver, a direct attack on Hougoumont Farm, a strategic point on Wellington's right flank. This diversionary attack was intended to draw reserves away from the main line, weakening the Allied center for a decisive blow. The battle at Hougoumont would prove to be a microcosm of the larger struggle, fierce, prolonged, and costly. Despite repeated French assaults, the garrison, composed of British guards, held firm, turning the farm into a deadly trap for French soldiers. The resilience of Hougoumont defenders inadvertently thwarted Napoleon's plan to quickly break Wellington's line. Meanwhile, the center of the battlefield witnessed a series of heavy infantry assaults by the French. Waves of French soldiers advanced under a hail of artillery and musket fire, targeting key points along the Allied line. The fighting was brutal and the casualties high. Notably, Le Haye-Saint, another fortified farm, became a focal point of contention. Its capture would have given Napoleon a significant advantage, providing a breach in Wellington's defenses. However, the steadfastness of the defenders, combined with logistical missteps by the French, kept it in Allied hands for much of the day. Throughout the afternoon, as the battle raged, the situation remained fluid and uncertain. Napoleon's forces achieved partial successes, capturing positions but failing to deliver a crushing blow. Wellington's line bent under pressure, but crucially did not break. Each side's resolve was tested as they awaited the arrival of the Prussian army, whose approach threatened to tip the balance of this epic confrontation. The afternoon of June 18, 1815, saw the Battle of Waterloo reach its climax as key turning points unfolded on the battlefield. The arrival of Prussian forces under Field Marshal Blucher was one such critical moment that began to tilt the scales against Napoleon. Earlier in the day, the Prussians had engaged French forces at Wavre, which delayed their arrival at Waterloo. However, by mid-afternoon, the 1st Prussian Corps had begun to arrive, exerting additional pressure on Napoleon's right flank. Reacting to the Prussian threat, Napoleon was forced to divert significant resources to stem their advance, resources that were critically needed in his main effort against Wellington's line. This diversion weakened his offensive power at a crucial juncture and allowed Wellington to stabilize his forces and prepare for continued resistance. As the Prussian forces incrementally entered the fray, they reinvigorated the Allied defense with their numbers and determination. This psychological boost to the Allies was palpable, as troops who had been holding the line against relentless French attacks now found new reserves of strength. Simultaneously, the Imperial Guard, Napoleon's elite reserve, was committed to what would become their final charge. This decision was made in desperation as Napoleon sought to break Wellington's center and force a decisive conclusion. The Guard advanced with their customary discipline and courage, attacking the Allied center at a time when the battle seemed balanced on a knife edge. However, despite their fearsome reputation, the Imperial Guard met stiff resistance. Wellington had anticipated such a move and prepared his infantry squares to repel the assault. Under intense musket and cannon fire, the Guard faltered and ultimately retreated, a sight that was unprecedented and deeply demoralizing to the rest of the French forces. The failure of the Imperial Guard's charge marked the definitive turning point of the battle. With their morale shattered and their numbers dwindling, French forces were unable to sustain their offense. The combined weight of Allied resistance and the Prussian reinforcements sealed Napoleon's fate, leading to his eventual defeat and retreat from the field. The Battle of Waterloo, concluded on June 18, 1815, marked a decisive end to Napoleon Bonaparte's rule and dramatically altered the course of European history. As the dust settled and the sounds of battle faded, the immediate aftermath saw tens of thousands of casualties on both sides, making it one of the deadliest battles of the era. Napoleon, witnessing the total collapse of his army, was forced to retreat back to Paris. His return was short-lived, facing political isolation and realizing the futility of continuing resistance, he abdicated for the second time on June 22, just 4 days after the battle. The defeat at Waterloo ended Napoleon's hopes of restoring his empire and led to his exile to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, where he would spend the remainder of his life. This exile was far more stringent than the previous one on Elba, ensuring he could no longer pose a threat to European stability. The consequences of Waterloo extended far beyond Napoleon's fate. The victory solidified the reputation of the Duke of Wellington, who would go on to enjoy a distinguished political career, eventually becoming the Prime Minister of Britain. Meanwhile, the Seventh Coalition moved swiftly to restore Louis XVIII to the French throne, re-establishing the Bourbon monarchy and setting the stage for a long period of relative peace in Europe, known as the Concert of Europe. This period saw the major powers of Europe, Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, and later France, work together to maintain the balance of power and prevent the rise of a single dominant state. The Congress of Vienna, reconvened after Napoleon's final defeat, implemented a new European order that curtailed French expansionist ambitions and promoted a balance of power that would largely prevent major continental wars for nearly a century. The legacy of Waterloo, therefore, was profound, shaping diplomatic strategies and European borders for generations. It symbolized the end of one era and the beginning of another, characterized by diplomatic engagement rather than military confrontation. As we've seen, the Battle of Waterloo was not just a clash of armies. It was a turning point that reshaped the landscape of Europe. From the strategic maneuvers to the valiant stands and the ultimate fallout, we've journeyed through one of history's most monumental battles. Thank you for joining us on this historical deep dive. Don't miss more epic tales of history. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for more adventures in time.